You know, it is one of the key aspects of life, isn't it, housing? You just cannot ever leave that to the market. That's a personal view, but, you know, I guess at this moment there wouldn't be many people who would argue with that when you see what's happening. And when you see the American government, the right-wing Republican American government coming in nationalising functions, you know, you can see how important the state still is. And last but not least on that, we need to constantly emphasise that housing is about homes. It's been seen as property investment, you know, people discussing it in the cafes and the cafe bars of London, certainly. It's been very much about investment. We are talking about homes, and homes are the bedrock of society. So I do think there's lots of wider messages that are going on that reinforce the reason why all of us are involved in housing and care about housing, those of you who are in this room and those who couldn't actually get into that room. I was absolutely delighted to hear the Minister's response. I have to say, ever since we started this review, she has been very receptive, not in you know, a rollover ministerial way and just take everything we want, but very receptive to the messages we've been making. And I think it's very rare to actually have a minister come along and give a speech like that, which actually says, you know, we are working together on this. We accept the agenda. I accept the agenda. This is what I'm going to do. Even though the quick wins have been quick in a geological sequence and terminology, nevertheless, you know, when you wait, it comes along. And I think October the 3rd, and she gave a nod to Nick there, and Nick, well, we all know what Nick's memory is like. It will happen. I think that is very indicative of a minister that has huge commitment. But I'll just quote one thing out of the document. And it reads, and there's a preamble about the crisis, but it reads, a bedrock of affordable housing in sustainable communities is essential to the well-being of Wales and its people, and a sustained provision will need to put in place. And I want to emphasise that. This is not just a fad of the moment. This is about sustained planning provision over a good number of years, and hopefully never again do we get to the state where people are absolutely completely outpriced out of the market. As you say, Alan, things that your parents wouldn't think is possible. And no longer would we get to the thing where we've seen obscene prices put on hovels and sheds. And so I want to emphasise that point, that we are about sustaining this programme and making sure that it sustains, and making sure that the attention span, which is sometimes short in many areas, you know, fads come and go. This one won't come and go, that it actually keeps going, and I hope everyone in this room keeps that pressure on the Welsh Assembly Government to make sure that that happens. And the other thing that I really do want to emphasise, and I think Matthew did pick it up a bit, this is very much about sustainable communities. We really try to emphasise that in the review. And it picks up, I think, Brian's point about this is not just building boxes and getting numbers. You know, we've all been through that. I was on Cardiff Council when we did St Mellons. Many of you will know the St Mellons estate, which was made notorious by a good friend, John Redwood, coming there and slagging off single mothers. I remember it very, very well. But at the time, as a council, we had no alternative but to we had a huge waiting list here. We had to release that land. We didn't want to do it in that bulk. But that was the only thing that came along. We worked in very constructive partnership, I have to say, with housing associations. But it was building a massive estate on the outskirts of town for many people who couldn't afford the bus fares to come in to keep contact with their relatives or get training. We actually knew we were creating something that was going to have problems. We've got to make sure that when we tackle this problem, we do this in a way that we know housing is about sustaining communities. And we also know, and I think this was picked up very much in the report, that if we're clever around this agenda, we can pick up some of the other key priorities around climate change, and Jocelyn referred to that, around training, around regeneration, and hopefully in the report we gave some really good examples. So this is not, the report was in no way a counsel of despair. I hope within that people could see there were lots of good things that were happening in Wales and outside that we could follow through. But to make sure that when we use that precious funding, when we use those precious resources, we actually get the most out of that. We should be clever enough these days than to just build those units up en bloc on big land. And I think Brian's point was absolutely pertinent. We've said in there those big bang answers, you know, just because that land is available, you go ahead and do it and you count the numbers and you tick them off. That is not clever planning in any sense. That needs to be that sensitivity around land swaps, around discussions between landowners, around phasing, around facility provision, the whole thing to make sure that where the houses go is where they're needed, that they actually add to the community. They add to keeping schools alive. They add to the mixture and vibrancy of that. You do put people in a place where they can access training and access facilities. So that degree of sophistication was very much part and parcel of the report. I think the report as well was very strong on the whole thing about change, and I hope it was, and I think that message came through. And we particularly focused on change within the Welsh Assembly government. And that message came over so strongly. And just very fortunately, we had the connections model and we had the Beecham's model to actually apply that. And to me, it fitted like a glove, which is quite nice because I've been involved in the Making the Connections agenda. But there you have, it's a prime example of how we could use the Beecham and use the connections model and actually apply that to an area that was very much in the public focus, that was very much cornerstone to many of the things we want to achieve as a government. But I've been in central government in the Assembly, and change does not come easily. And I think it needs the family, the housing family, to support that change and support Matthew and support others who are trying to put those in place. Because, as Jocelyn said, this is a stakeholder, all the stakeholders involved in this change programme belongs to you. So what happens in the Assembly government and how that helps and supports you and its leadership is critically important. We also picked out, and this comes very much from the origins of the report, the need to have a complete relook at the regulatory basis. Matthew alerted to that. It did seem to us to be overly restrictive in areas that it shouldn't have been, and less conducive to supporting and looking at the areas where it needed to be, particularly in governance and finance. And I would draw people's attention again to the work that Peter led within the document, which sets out a new model of regulation, which is much more about giving freedom, but sets in, if you like, a tiered approach there to actually give that early warning system through. So the regulatory framework is really important. It's critically important, I think, at this difficult financial time. And I'm pleased that that's being given some priority.